My name's Mark, and when all this went down, my wife, Diane, and I had been married for a little over 2 decades. We met back in college and tied the knot not long after graduation. Our daughters, Natalie and Sophie, were close in age, just a year apart. Natalie had just started her freshman year at a big state university about 2 hours away, while Sophie was in her senior year of high school. About 6 weeks earlier, we had packed up Natalie's things and moved her into the dorms, where she was sharing a room with one of her close friends. Sophie wasn't sure yet where she'd end up going for college, but there was a good chance she and Natalie might wind up at the same school. Like most sisters, they bickered now and then, but at the end of the day, they had each other's backs and were pretty tight. When Natalie left, it left this emotional gap in our household. Things just felt different. But we were happy for her and excited about the new chapter in her life. As for me, I worked as a partner at a large accounting firm, while Diane had a supervisor role at a local building supply company. She went back to work once the girls were both in school and had steadily climbed the ranks, even though her degree was in English. I made more money than she did, but financially, we were doing well: nice house, newer cars, and all the other little luxuries that made life comfortable. And the best part? Diane genuinely seemed to love her job. That Friday afternoon, I left work at least an hour early, looking forward to the weekend. Sophie was away at a school camp and wouldn't be back until Sunday night, which meant Diane and I had the house to ourselves. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of spending some much-needed quality time together, maybe a romantic dinner at our favorite Italian spot, followed by some long-overdue intimacy. Ever since we dropped Natalie off at school, things had felt a little off between us, like we were out of sync. I figured a weekend alone might help us reconnect. Pulling into the garage, I saw Diane's car already parked inside. Looked like she had decided to call it a day early too. Maybe she was thinking the same thing I was, some uninterrupted time together. I was already planning to suggest dinner at the bistro to set the tone for the weekend. But when I walked into the house, she wasn't in the kitchen, so I headed toward our bedroom to change and see if she was in there. "Hey, honey! I'm home." "You in the bedroom?" I called out. "Yes, Mark, I'm in here," she answered. When I stepped into the bedroom, I found Diane sitting at her vanity, carefully applying makeup. She was dressed up, wearing that little black dress that always turned heads, along with the pearl necklace I had given her for Christmas last year. Her dressy heels sat on the floor beside her. But what really caught my attention was her overnight bag sitting open on the bench, already partially packed. A few pieces of lingerie and casual clothes were neatly folded inside. My esoteric twisted. "Oh crap," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "I completely forgot we had plans for the weekend. Must be having a senior moment. Where are we headed? I can get ready real quick." Diane let out a small sigh and turned to face me. "Mark, I'm sorry, but I didn't tell you. I have a date this weekend." I blinked. What? I wasn't expecting you home this early," she continued. "I wanted to have this conversation right before I left. I know you'll be upset, and I just don't want to fight about it." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "Wait a second. You're going on a date? With another man? What the hell, Diane? Since when do we have an open marriage? Please tell me this is some kind of messed up joke and that you actually planned a surprise getaway for us." She didn't look the least bit ashamed. If anything, she seemed like she had rehearsed what she was about to say. "Sweetie, it's just one weekend. I'll still be the same old me when I get back Sunday night. Since Natalie left for school, I've been feeling off. I need this, just for myself. It's just one weekend, Mark. Out of the hundreds we've spent together. You'll see, it'll be good for us, for our marriage." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "How long have you been cheating on me, Diane? Who is this guy? Who's the scumbag who thinks it's okay to ask a married woman to spend a weekend with him? Are you leaving me for him?" She actually rolled her eyes. "No, silly. I love you. And only you. Then who is he?" "That doesn't matter, so I'm not going to tell you," she said, shaking her head. "I'm taking an Uber, so you'll never even see him. We've had lunch a few times, but I haven't actually cheated on you. Not yet. And I'm not leaving you for him. I was too stunned to respond. I knew this would upset you, she continued, her voice softening. That's why I didn't want to tell you until the last minute. But I also didn't want to sneak around behind your back. Honestly, I don't even think I'll see him again after this weekend. This is just something I need to do, Mark. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He makes me feel beautiful. She went on, her eyes pleading. Wanted. Desired. He's almost 10 years younger than me, and I won't always have this chance. I need this, to feel young again. Alive. Can't you understand? I felt like I was going to be sick. I was hoping you'd give me a weekend pass, she said, reaching for my hand. Just one weekend. I promise, when I come back, I'll make you the happiest husband you know. I just need to get this out of my system. I yanked my hand away. You're seriously standing there, asking me to be okay with this? It's just intimacy, Mark, she said, as if that made it better. One weekend out of the 1,000 we've had together. And the guy I'll be with? He's married too. With kids. He's not leaving his wife, so you don't have to worry about me running off with him. This doesn't change anything between us. You can't be serious. I wish you'd understand and not hold this against me, she said, her voice practically dripping with entitlement. But I've made up my mind. I'm doing this. If you don't let your pride get in the way, you'll see it's not a big deal. It doesn't have to affect our marriage. I just stood there, staring at her, my mind refusing to process the words coming out of her mouth. Who the hell was this woman? Had my real wife been abducted and replaced with some lunatic? I wanted to say something, anything, but my brain hadn't caught up yet. Then, somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought surfaced. Something that might just turn this disaster in my favor. And as that thought took shape, a small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. So let me get this straight. You're dead set on spending the weekend with some other guy, no matter the consequences? Diane let out an exasperated sigh. Mark, do you have to be so dramatic? There don't have to be any consequences, she said, even throwing up air quotes around the word. Unless, of course, you insist on there being some. But to answer your question, yes. I've made up my mind. I need this weekend away. She said it so casually, like she was heading off for a spa retreat, and not to betray our marriage. You really think this won't change anything between us? That you'll come back on Sunday and everything will be just the same? I shook my head. I bet he's been feeding you this nonsense about how you can cheat for a whole weekend with no consequences. But let me tell you, he's lying. He's saying whatever he has to so you'll end up in his bed. Diane gave me a look, but I kept going. I'll give you until your Uber gets here to change your mind. After that, I'll be planning my own weekend, without you. And one last thing, if you leave, I won't follow you or do anything crazy. But you promise to keep your phone on so I can find you if I need to. You refuse to tell me who this guy is, and honestly, I don't even care. But if something happens, I'd rather not hear about it from the police because he turned out to be some psycho. She studied my face for a few seconds, then nodded. Fine. I'll keep my phone on so you can track me, if it makes you feel better. But only if you swear you won't interfere or try to stop me. Deal, I said. But Diane, you can still change your mind. We could fix this if we tried. I know a guy at work who found a really good therapist. He and his wife were struggling, and therapy helped them turn things around. We could do the same. Diane groaned and rolled her eyes. Mark, we don't need therapy. I just need this weekend for me. Now, why don't you let me finish getting ready? She turned back to the mirror, focusing on her makeup. Oh, and by the way, I picked up a gourmet meal for you on my way home. It's in the fridge. Just pop it in the microwave. She glanced at the time. I told him I'd meet him at 7, so I really need to get moving. She was actually sitting there, applying her makeup, picking out the perfect lipstick, for another man. I thought about heading to the den to make a phone call, but then it hit me, why sneak off? If Diane could plan a weekend away with another man right in front of me, then I sure as hell didn't need to tiptoe around either. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and selected the right one. As the call started ringing, I could see Diane watching me in the mirror. Her curiosity piqued. She could only hear my side of the conversation, but that was fine by me. "Hi, Emily. It's Mark." There was a pause before I heard her warm, familiar voice. "Oh, hey, Mark. Wow, long time no talk. How have you been?" Hearing her voice again brought back a flood of memories. Emily and I worked at the same accounting firm, though we hadn't really kept in touch. A decade ago, when she first joined the firm, she was assigned as my administrative assistant. Back then, I was still a senior associate, working my way up the ladder, and Emily was nothing short of incredible at her job. She played a huge role in helping me make partner a few years later. She and her husband, David, were about 5 years younger than Diane and me. He was a rising executive, and they had waited to start their family until David was more established. Eventually, they had a son, Ethan. Then, 5 years ago, tragedy struck. David had been driving home late after a long day of merger meetings when a commercial truck ran a red light and slammed into his car. He was killed instantly. The months that followed were brutal. Emily was devastated, trying to navigate life as a widow and a single mother. I did everything I could to help, off-Sophia's support, helping her find a good lawyer. Turns out, the trucker had been drinking, and after a lawsuit, Emily received a multi-million-dollar settlement due to the company's gross negligence. But beyond all of that, something else had happened between us. During those difficult months, Emily and I discovered an undeniable connection. We hadn't noticed it before, probably because we were both married, but there it was. A pull, something deeper than just friendship. We talked about it, about what we felt for each other. And as much as we cared, we both agreed, nothing could happen. I was a married man, and Emily had too much respect for my vows to ever come between me and Diane. So we made a choice. We ended things before they could start. We kept our integrity intact, never crossing any emotional or physical lines. When she eventually returned to work, she took a different position on another floor so we wouldn't see each other as much. Despite her financial security, she chose to stay with the firm. She loved the people, the work, and needed stability for Ethan's sake. I remember her parting words to me. "If your marital status ever changes, give me a call." I had promised I would. Back then, I never imagined that Diane, the woman I had been so loyal to, would be the one to break our vows first. So now, standing in our bedroom, watching my wife get ready for another man, I kept my promise. "Not so great," I told Emily, my voice steady. "My wife just informed me that we have an open marriage now. Apparently, she's spending the weekend with another man, and my feelings on the matter don't count." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You're kidding. Mark, tell me you're joking." "I wish I was," I sighed. "I thought we had a solid marriage too. But right now, I'm standing in our bedroom, watching her put on makeup for her date." Emily was silent for a moment, processing what I had just told her. "Maybe she'll be a good sport and confirm it for you," I added, holding out the phone in Diane's direction. "Diane, would you mind telling Emily about your weekend plans? She seems to think I'm making this up." I made sure to say it loud enough so Emily could hear. Diane hesitated, then glanced at me through the mirror. And in that moment, I saw something flicker across her face, just for a second. Doubt. Maybe she hadn't expected me to respond like this. Maybe she thought I'd beg her to stay. Instead, I had done something she hadn't seen coming. I had called Emily. And Diane knew exactly what that meant. Diane knew exactly who Emily was. Years ago, when Emily had worked as my administrative assistant, Diane and I had even attended David's funeral together. Diane had made casseroles and other meals, and we brought them over to help Emily and her son, Ethan, during those dark days. She also knew that after David's death, I'd been there for them, helping Emily find a top-notch attorney to go after the trucking company responsible for her husband's death. And she knew one more thing, that Emily and I hadn't worked together in years. We had completely severed any personal and professional ties before anything could cross a line. Emily worked in a different area of the firm now, and I hadn't mentioned her in ages. That's why Diane's reaction was so sharp. "I will do no such thing," she snapped, her voice laced with anger. Her eyes burned as she turned on me. "We do not have an open marriage. It's just one weekend. Why do you have to go and ruin everything?" Then, with a bitter edge, she added, "Maybe I won't even come back on Sunday if you're going to act this ridiculous." She yanked out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. I glanced over and saw she had just requested an Uber. "I'm going outside to wait," she declared, grabbing her overnight bag and marching through the bedroom toward the front door. "Maybe try not to be so childish when I get back." I lifted my phone back to my ear. "Did you hear that?" Emily's voice came through, quiet but firm. "Yeah. I heard every word. Mark, I can't believe she's doing this to you." "Yeah, well, believe it. Do you know who he is?" she asked. "The guy she's seeing?" I let out a humorless laugh. "No, she wouldn't tell me his name. But she did mention he's married and has young kids. Claims it's not an affair, just a one-time thing for the weekend. But honestly, I don't believe a damn thing she says anymore." Emily sighed, the weight of it heavy over the phone. "Oh my God, Mark! This is just unbelievable." Then, hesitantly, she asked, "Did you call me just to tell me what she was up to? Or is there something else?" I took a deep breath. I remembered something. When we parted ways, I promised I'd call you if my marital status ever changed. And now I'm making good on that promise. Because after this, there's no way in hell I'm staying married to Diane. There was a pause, then a quiet, surprised laugh. "Wow. I don't even know what to say. I'm flattered, Mark." Then, almost sheepishly, she added, "Ethan's at David's parents' house for the weekend, and well, I actually had a date planned for tonight." My Sarakac clenched. "Oh, Emily. I didn't even think. I was so caught up in my own mess that I didn't consider that someone like you would have plans. I didn't even know you were seeing anyone." She laughed softly. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not. I was in a relationship for about a year, but it ended a few months ago. He wanted to get married, but I just didn't feel a spark. I wasn't about to settle down just to avoid being alone." I felt an odd sense of relief. She continued, "Tonight's date? My sister set it up. But honestly, I don't really care. I'll just tell him that a close friend got some really bad news, and I need to cancel. It's technically the truth, I just won't mention that the friend is a man I used to dream about when I fell asleep at night." That hit me like a punch to the chest. "Wow," I murmured. "Now I'm flattered." "You should be," she said teasingly. "And yes, I'd break my date for you. In a heartbeat." A warmth spread through me, cutting through the bitterness of the evening. "Ethan and I moved a couple of years ago," Emily added. "We used some of the settlement money to buy a new place in a neighborhood with better schools. I'll text you the address when we hang up. If you're still living in the same place, I'm only about 15 minutes away." I confirmed that I hadn't moved, and we agreed I'd pick her up in an hour. That night, we went to the little Italian bistro where I had originally planned to take Diane. The second I saw Emily, I felt something shift, something I hadn't felt in years. Our connection hadn't faded over time. If anything, it had grown stronger. We spent that night, and most of the weekend, in her bed. And let me tell you, what we had wasn't just emotional. It was physical, too. The kind of chemistry that couldn't be forced or faked. It was real. It was raw. And it was unlike anything I had ever experienced. On Sunday morning, as we lay tangled together in her sheets, we talked about Diane. About what she had done. And I told Emily what I already knew deep down: there was no saving my marriage. No therapy. No apologies. No going back. Emily smiled then, her face glowing with something that looked an awful lot like hope. "Well, Mr. she said, running a hand down my chest. I'd say we've got one hell of a future ahead of us. I laughed, pulling her closer. You think so? I know so, she whispered. And I know Ethan would love to have you back in his life. We celebrated our newfound future the best way two people could. And then, with a reluctant sigh, I got dressed and headed home. I had unfinished business. While I waited for Diane to return, I called our daughter, Natalie, at college. I told her the truth. Her mother had left me to spend the weekend with another man, and I was filing for divorce. She was devastated. I asked her not to reach out to Diane or her younger sister, Sophie, until I had a chance to talk to them in person. Sophie was still away on a school trip, but I planned to tell her as soon as she got back that night. At around 2 p.m., I heard a car pull up outside. Diane walked through the front door, dragging her overnight bag behind her, her face lit up with a wide, satisfied smile. She looked fresh. Happy. Almost giddy. Hi, sweetheart, she cooed. I knew you'd be home waiting for me. She set her bag down and beamed at me. See? Nothing's changed. I'm still the same wife who left on Friday night. I just stared at her. You know, she continued, her voice taking on a teasing lilt. I was thinking. I want to make it up to you. I promise you'll be the happiest husband alive. I've heard that reclaiming your wife can be really fun. She smirked. If you want, I can slip into something beautiful, and we can. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Diane, I said flatly, I know how much you hate protection, and I've had a vasectomy. So don't lie to me and tell me Greg used protection when he screwed you all weekend. You might be willing to trust him with your health, but I sure as hell don't. Her smile faltered. For the first time since she walked through the door, she looked uncertain. Her eyes darted away. Then, suddenly, she snapped her head up. Wait. How do you know his name? Her face paled. You promised you wouldn't follow me or interfere with my weekend. I leaned back in my chair, calm and steady. Diane had no idea. But she was about to find out. I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but firm. I didn't follow you, I said, watching her closely. I had my private investigator do it for me. All I had to do was give him your location. Diane's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Oh, and thanks for keeping your phone on, I continued, my tone almost casual. That made it a whole lot easier. He couldn't start tailing you until Saturday, since you blindsided me with your plans on Friday night, but I made sure he got to work. Had to pay him double for the last-minute job, but honestly, worth every penny, especially when Greg's wife found out what her husband was up to. Diane's face went pale. I let that sink in for a second before delivering the final blow. Did you know Greg's wife's father owns the company where you and Greg both work? I asked. Because I'm guessing Greg's career is about to take a nosedive first thing Monday morning. Her breath hitched. Oh, and as for you? I shrugged. Your workday's going to be real interesting, too. But I asked them not to fire you. At least not yet. Diane slumped onto the couch across from me, her shoulders sagging in defeat. I can't believe you'd do this to me, she muttered. I let out a short laugh. That makes two of us. She shook her head, staring at the floor. Greg said this weekend would help our marriage, give it the spark it needed. I raised an eyebrow. That's what happens when you listen to your boyfriend instead of your husband. Turns out, the only thing you and Greg managed to spark was the destruction of 2 marriages. Diane let out a desperate, panicked wail. No, 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 no. I don't want a divorce. I told you, this was just a one-time thing, never to be repeated. Greg and I aren't having an affair. She lifted her head, her eyes pleading now. I've been so down since Natalie left for school. I thought this would help me feel better about myself. I thought it would make me a better wife for you. She swallowed hard. I did it for us. I closed my eyes for a moment, pressing my fingers to my temple. Diane, don't. Can't we fix this? She begged. Can't we try marriage counseling? You told me a friend of yours found a great therapist. Her expression flickered with hope. For a split second, I almost felt bad for what I was about to say. But then I remembered the way she had brushed off my pain, called me childish, and walked out that door without a second thought. When I was young, my dad told me something, I said. If you take an action against someone, you don't get to control their reaction. I met her gaze. I begged you not to go. I pleaded with you. But you ignored me, called me ridiculous, and left anyway. Her lip trembled. I have never felt so betrayed and disrespected in my entire life. I continued. If you had called it off when I asked, if you had even considered what this would do to me, we might have been able to figure things out. Maybe we could have gone to counseling, talked through why you felt like you needed this weekend with another man. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Believe me, I said, my voice softer now. I've been struggling too since Natalie left for college. But unlike you, I didn't decide that sleeping with someone else was the solution. And I sure as hell wouldn't have sprung it on you at the last second the way you did to me. I sighed, shaking my head. The second you got into that Uber, Diane? Our marriage was over. She let out a strangled sob, collapsing to her knees on the floor. She crawled over to my chair and wrapped her arms around my legs, gripping me like I was her last lifeline. Please, Mark, she cried. Please don't leave me. I was stupid. I let Greg fill my head with lies. The intimacy was mediocre at best. He's not even close to being in your league. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. We can work on this. We can be better than ever. Please don't leave me. I reached for my phone and stopped the recording. Then, with a deep breath, I met her gaze. Diane, I have a confession to make. Her breath hitched. What do you mean? I paused, letting the weight of my next words settle between us. Did you see Emily after I left? She asked, a strange excitement creeping into her voice. It's okay, Mark. Really, it's okay. We both took the weekend off from our marriage. That makes us even, right? I let out a slow exhale. Yes, I admitted. I did spend the weekend with Emily. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I leaned forward slightly. Emily and I became close after David died, I explained. There was always a strong connection between us, but we never crossed any lines. No emotional affair. No physical affair. We both knew it was dangerous, so we parted ways. Diane swallowed hard. I loved you, Diane. I respected my vows. And Emily respected them, too, so much so that she walked away, even when it hurt. But before she left, she told me something. I met her gaze. She told me to call her if my marital status ever changed. Diane let out a shaky breath. You threw our marriage away, I said simply. You ignored my pleas and made your choice. And in the end? It turns out that Emily respected our marriage more than you ever did. Diane broke. She collapsed again, sobbing against my legs. Oh my God! What have I done? I let out a slow, measured breath. That makes two of us. I stood up, gently untangling myself from her grip. Emily and I reconnected this weekend, I told her. And what we found? It's even stronger now than it was before. We're soulmates, Diane. And we wouldn't have had this chance, maybe wouldn't have ever spoken again, if you hadn't betrayed me. Diane shuddered. But you did, I said. And now, we don't ever want to be apart again. I met her gaze one last time. I'm filing for divorce next week. A fresh wave of tears streamed down her face. I could file under adultery, but I won't, I continued. I'll keep it under irreconcilable differences. I'll be fair in the settlement, because I want to remember the good times we had. But I won't pretend things can ever go back to the way they were. I let the words hang between us before adding. I already told Natalie the truth about what you did. And we'll be telling Sophie too. It's only fair. Diane buried her face in her hands. I won't stop you from telling them about Emily, I added. But if you try to twist the story and make me the bad guy, I'll have no problem making my private investigator's report and photos public." She flinched. She knew she had lost. Later that night, we sat down with Sophie. She was devastated, of course, and asked if we could try marriage counseling. Even without knowing every detail, she understood that her mother had screwed up badly. And when she realized that I had already reconnected with Emily, she seemed to understand that our marriage was past saving. I stayed in the guest room for a few nights to make sure Sophie was okay. Then, once I was sure she'd be alright, I packed my bags. For now, I moved into an extended stay hotel, splitting my time between Diane and Sophie, and Emily. Later that week, I handed Diane a draft of what I considered a fair settlement. Even though the money from David's death was set aside in a trust for Emily and Ethan, I knew I could leave Diane the house and provide a decent amount for alimony and child support without it affecting my financial stability. To her credit, she never tried to make me out as the villain or pin the divorce on me. Instead, she stuck to a simple explanation, telling people we had just grown apart. Some folks saw right through that, so eventually, she'd admit the truth. When all else failed, she'd say, "Yeah, I really screwed up. He had every right to leave." Emily and I got married shortly after my divorce was finalized. The wedding was small, intimate, just close family and friends. Emily was absolutely stunning, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I was grateful that both Natalie and Sophie were there, smiling, genuinely happy for me. I think they understood that after what had happened, there was no way I could have stayed married to their mother. They just wanted me to be happy. And Emily? Well, she was convinced that my baby-making days weren't over just yet. So, after some long talks, I had my vasectomy reversed, and before long, we had 2 beautiful, healthy babies. Our firstborn was a boy, Davy. A year later, we welcomed our little girl, Olivia, named after my mother. As for Ethan, he and I built a strong father-son relationship over the years. Looking back, I realized how much he had needed a father figure in his life. I like to believe that David, wherever he is watching over Emily and Ethan, at peace knowing they've found love and happiness again. Now, nearly 10 years have passed since that fateful weekend. Emily and I are as happy as 2 people could possibly be. Today, we're at Natalie's wedding, watching her marry her longtime boyfriend, Eric. Jackie is the flower girl, Jack is the ring bearer, and Ethan, now a handsome, athletic high schooler, attended with his equally lovely girlfriend. I hadn't seen Diane in over 6 years. She looked fine, aging gracefully, I suppose, but next to Emily, she simply couldn't compare. Emily had only grown more radiant over the years, motherhood bringing out something even more beautiful in her. Diane had remarried a man named Brian, someone she'd met through work. We were introduced at the rehearsal dinner, and I had to admit, he seemed like a genuinely good guy. At one point, we had a private conversation where he mentioned that Diane had told him everything about our past. She had taken full responsibility for our divorce, something I acknowledged with a small nod. I reassured him that whatever had led Diane to make the choices she did, that version of her was long gone. For the most part, she had been a good wife and partner. He agreed wholeheartedly. I also learned that her job situation had been rough for a while. She was on thin ice for some time, stuck with lousy assignments, but she managed to prove herself. Eventually, she was promoted to area manager, the very position Greg had held before he was fired. At the wedding reception, Emily and I mingled with guests, eating, dancing, and just soaking in the joy of the day. We had gifted Natalie and Eric a honeymoon in Hawaii and a sizable check to help with their first home. Seeing them so happy made it all worth it. As the evening wound down, I noticed Diane approaching Emily. They spoke briefly, and then Diane made her way over to me. "Would you dance with me?" she asked. Emily said she's okay with it. I looked over at Emily, who gave me a small nod. So, I took Diane's hand and led her to the dance floor. As the slow music played, for a fleeting moment, it felt like old times. We didn't speak, just swayed in silence, the years of history between us filling the empty spaces. It wasn't until the song was ending that she finally looked up at me. "Mark," she whispered, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm so sorry for what I did to us all those years ago. I'm glad I found Brian, but I never stopped loving you. Seeing you so happy with Emily makes me happy for you, but it also hurts, knowing what might have been." I let out a soft breath. "Diane, for what it's worth, I forgive you," I said gently. "And I truly wish you and Brian nothing but happiness. He seems like a great guy. You're lucky to have him." She blinked back tears as I continued. "He and I actually have something in common," I said with a small smile. "We both love you." Her breath hitched, but I wasn't done. "You're right, Emily and I are incredibly happy," I admitted. "And in a strange way, we have you to thank for bringing us together. So please forgive yourself. Love Brian and your family with everything you have." Then, I leaned in and pressed a light kiss to her forehead before taking her hand and walking her back to the table. Brian and Emily were there, quietly watching our last dance as former lovers. I turned to Emily and met her gaze. That warm, beautiful smile of hers, the one that had saved me, healed me, and given me a second chance at love, was still there, shining just as bright as the day she came back into my life. And in that moment, I silently thanked God for bringing her back to me, even if it had happened in the most unexpected way imaginable. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.